Astrology is the myths of the stars and planets, telling the themes and plots of our lives. These stories come to us daily through our satellite, the Moon. She is constantly spinning astro news. Hi, I'm Merrylin Leblanc with Moonwise. And today, the Moon is in the sign of Pisces, the sign of the Great Mother. And we're going to talk about the feminine somewhat today. Joining me is Daniel Fiverson, astrologer here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Welcome back to Moonwise, Daniel.
Thank you, Merrylin.
So you have been on a roll this year with the women in Congress, and especially with AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And you've talked a little bit about her before on Moonwise, and want to point out more things about her. So let's get into AOC and what she brings to us as American citizens.
Sure. She's a great American citizen. She's the kind of role model we all need, though I think she's scaring the hell out of a lot of people that maybe need to be scared. But let's kind of start the story at the beginning. I don't want to go all the way back to the Civil War and Margaret Sanger and suffragettes, but the story really begins back in the 1970s. Even though, astrologically we know that the asteroids, the primary asteroids, Ceres, Pallas, Athena, Vesta, and Hestia, were all discovered back in the last century, Ceres being the first back in 1801. We did not have an ephemeris. We had no way to plot their movements until the 1970s, which is really significant. Because it was also in the 1970s that we began to hear from writers like
Gloria Steinem.
Thank you, Gloria Steinem, and others who really began to bring these issues of the women's movement front and center into our culture. And most recently, in the last 2 years, we had the Women's March on Washington in 2017, and then clearly Congress being overrun in the midterm elections last year by progressive women. And so, we stand in a whole new place in terms of our place in history, the development of our country. And the news, in the past week has really been, kind of disconcerting to a lot of us. Because we have seen, the racism and the xenophobia, the misogyny really, come to a peak, even worse than it's been. The rally in the South, a couple of days ago, send her home. This whole attitude towards these women who found their place, began to stand in their power back in November, and they've taken on the name of the Squad. I've been calling them the goddesses of the blue wave.
I like that better than the Squad.
Yeah,
the Squad has a kind of a strange sound to it, and yet they've embraced it.
Yeah, because I think it stands for their stance, their posture, if you would. And because they are clearly postured, with a position, with a movement as well. It's interesting. Just about a year ago, I was up in Taos. We go up there every year for our birthdays, and we were in the Harwood up in Taos, and there was a painting on the wall that was about 12 feet wide and about 8 feet high. It was the entire wall, and it was a Native American Dene artist, Navajo artist. I don't remember her name, but it was kind of a familiar image, if you would. It was three Indian women, but they were warriors, and one was holding a knife, and one was holding another kind of a weapon. They were very, very aggressive. And the minute I saw that image, it just grabbed me, because I realized that that's what is beginning to emerge in our culture. And we can see it astrologically in Black Moon Lilith, who is an actual point, represents an alternative lunar energy in the sky. We can see it in Eris, who threw the golden apple into the the marriage of Paris, the wedding of this disruption, interruption that's occurring is healthy and is just a natural reaction to all the stagnation and crystallization that's occurred. So at the center of this, I think you actually had a good list of who some of these actors are. You want to maybe kind of like read it into the...
Well, besides Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, there's Ilhan Omar from the state of Minnesota, Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, and Rashida Tlaib, I'm not quite sure how that TL at the beginning is pronounced, from the state of Missouri.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who in November of last year upset the Democratic chairman of in Manhattan, in her district in the Bronx, actually is the leader of the pack. And I'd like to kind of talk about her a little bit today and discuss her chart, because I think it's significant, and she represents to me what the new American patriotism looks like.
You call her the leader of the pack. What distinguishes her in that way in your mind?
I think she's been the most vocal. I think that she is the most... She seems to be the one who's most focused on moving this whole thing forward. Her Green New Deal, I think, is a good example. But it's just her energy. She seems to have this galvanizing magnetism about her that has created the center. She has really become the magnetic center of this movement.
Well, if we just deal with the planets and not the asteroids, it's interesting because her sun, which for any of us represents a kind of leadership that we have, whether it's purely of ourselves or others involved in our lives, but with her sun is flanked by Mars and Pluto.
Mm-hmm.
And Mars is also a planet that reflects a certain type of leadership, and that's like somebody who initiates, somebody who takes the lead in bringing up something. And she has often been perhaps the most outspoken, although I did notice this week in the news where Ilhan Omar, who was the only one who is not born in this country but is a naturalized citizen. She was born in Somalia, where she seemed to be on an equal footing in terms of that leadership you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know that there's necessarily a hierarchy. I don't want to make it hierarchical.
Okay, that's
because
good.
because I think it's quite an Aquarian group. I think that that there's an equality among them, and that they share the load. Mostly they share the responsibility, Merrylin. I think it's about responsibility, and picking up carrying the staff forward. To me, Mars is courage. And in Congress, in our country, after 250 years of history and tradition and patterning and conditioning and structuring and the crystallization of the way our legislature moves, it's very difficult to have the courage to be different, to survive, to survive that kind of independence. So clearly, yes. Her chart's really interesting. She has a Grand Cross. And the Grand Cross is a mix of mutable and cardinal, which really represents her whole chart. She has a lot of cardinal energy. She has a stellium in Capricorn in her first house. She has the moon in Aries in her third house on her IC. She has Jupiter and Chiron in Cancer in her seventh house, and then she has Mercury in Libra on her MC in her ninth house. So, first of all, the planets and the angles are identities. They anchor the personality, and each of when you have a planet on the angle, it's a very, very powerful personality. It's someone who's expressing themselves clearly, authentically, almost instinctively in the world without much effort. When they walk into the room, you know that they're there. And she has that energy, but it's all she meets the world with her Sagittarius our Sagittarius ascendant, is how she meets the world with this openness and receptivity and ability to understand where you're coming from.
And it struck me when you handed me her chart, and I was thinking at first that you handed me the United States chart with the Sibley chart with the Sagittarius rising, because I saw that rising, and it's not the exact same degree, but it's close enough, very close actually, and she represents the openness that we in our lifetime have experienced this country to be, and in some ways she's fighting for that same openness for the immigrants that are being detained at our borders these days.
Right. She's made truth to be her catchword. The reason that she meets the world with her search for truth, and that's what it all boils down to. And I think that is her strength, and that's what we recognize as what it is that she is outing in the world around us. That the truth has become the primary essential resource of our time.
Yeah, so, looking at the time, you're listening to Moonwise here on KSFR 101.1 FM. I'm Merrylin Leblanc with my guest Daniel Fiverson. It's time for the Moon Minute. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to Moonwise. I'm Merrylin LeBlanc, and here on KSFR 101.1 FM, or streaming on the web at ksfr.org, where you can always listen to podcasts of this show and other shows that KSFR produces. And I want to take this moment before we get back into our conversation with our guest today to thank all of you who have been supporting KSFR. We have come very close to meeting the goal that we had set for the summer. We still need a few more funds, so if you're streaming right now and at ksfr.org, or if you can go there and make a contribution, we'd greatly appreciate it. And my guest today is Daniel Fiverson. We've been talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it's interesting, Daniel, because, we have this Pisces moon today, and the next sign will be Aries. Monday we'll have this Aries moon, and that is Alexandria's moon. So she's going to be having a lunar eclipse. I wonder if she'll be not a lunar eclipse, a lunar return. So I wonder if this particular moon brings her into the limelight in a very special way. What do you think about that, Aries moon?
It's an interesting question. I don't know that she's ever really been out of the limelight. She keeps popping up almost every other day, somehow, somewhere. But yeah, clearly the lunar return, I think, is going to certainly bring a whole refresher for her in terms of her her emotional momentum forward. I just want to kind of point out some of the highlights in her chart that really excite me, and things that I saw there that I really recognize as really who she is. We'll start in her first house. I mean, she has Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, Vesta, all in Capricorn in her first house. They're not all in orb, but they're chained. So they're all, it's a series of, three different conjunctions that are chaining them all together. She's all about responsibility. She's all about being the authority. She's very much about, really creating something. She's not just going to sit back and, think about it or write about it. She's going to get out there and do it. Capricorn is a very initiatory cardinal, need to accomplish something, hands-on. It's got to be, I got to be able to touch it and feel it and know that it's real kind of person. It's opposing her Jupiter. Now, Jupiter, everybody thinks Jupiter's this greater benefic, from the Hellenists, and, and he is. I mean, he's Zeus. He makes everything bigger. He can be Midas, but he can also take our problems and make them bigger, too. He enlarges whatever he touches. So here we have this opposition from Jupiter to all this Capricorn. So you can imagine what that's going to do. It's just going to increase it and augment it and make it even much more powerful in her seventh house. And what that does is cause all this manifestation to occur through her relationships and all her work interfacing with the outer world.
That's a very strong Jupiter in Cancer as well. I mean, it's said to be exalted, where you get that sense of nurturing that comes from the sign of Cancer, as well as that sense of an individual being strongly developed as an individual in that sign with that exaltation. And one other thing, it's like, the Jupiter Saturn that you're referring to in terms of they're in a full phase, and that's the full phase of a 20-year cycle that began 10 years before her birth in the sign of Taurus. It had a lot to do, the cycle, we're ending the cycle, but it had a lot to do with our looking for what is truly of value to us, that a lasting value in our lives. And she comes in, and I know she's told a story about how her father introduced her to Washington, D.C., and how this is a part of us. And I feel like, in the full phase, she's embodying the value of the United States very strongly, and she captured it in telling the story of how her
embodies a great word, because Ceres is right there, and that's a key word for Ceres, is actually embodying it. Yeah, that's perfect. It really is good. And this opposition is squared by Mercury in Libra. I mean, there's this tremendous need in her to find equality and balance, and to find this middle way. Even though she's pushing the left all the way to the left, what she's really doing is pulling the right out of that hard socket that they're plugged into. We have to look at it more as traction, rather than her just way out there, waving this flag, in her left hand, wildly independently. She's pulling us forward. She's not just standing out there on her own. And the moon's conjunct Pallas Athena, and I've spoken about Pallas here. I think that Pallas Athena really is leading the charge at the moment in terms of this feminine energy that's coming through, and it's not just women. I mean, this it's coming through men as well. I have Pallas Athena conjunct my midheaven. It's why I'm here talking about it. I'm in a way a surrogate for Pallas as well.
She whispered in your ear and said, "Take me out to the world, Daniel."
They whisper in my ear when I'm sleeping at night. It's just embedded in who she is. It's embedded in how she sees herself. The moon is our self-image, and with Pallas conjunct her moon, she sees herself standing there, holding that shield and spear, and wearing that armor, and standing proudly as the spiritual warrior. She's an amazing woman. Her star rose far before her. I don't know if everybody knows or does not know this story, but when she was in high school, she entered a science fair, and the prize for the science fair was having an asteroid named in your honor. Well, guess what? She won. There was an Ocasio-Cortez asteroid. Her star is in the sky. It was at 5 degrees of Leo at the moment that she was born, which happens to be conjunct to my son. So it's a small world.
Oh, wow, the connections. No wonder you're even more strongly attracted, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
She's committed, she's independent, she's not afraid to initiate a crisis in order to accomplish what's her vision. She embodies a natural blend of authority, individuality, vision, and authenticity. She's an outspoken activist, willing to take the fight to wherever it needs to go. And at times, she might be prone to shoot from the hip. There's no question. It's this angular personalities that she exhibits that is just so strong and so intense and so powerful.
What's also striking me too is that her sun and Mars, her Juno and the Black Moon. These are the Black Moon and is a point, but Juno being an asteroid. They're all in Libra in her 10th house. Well, in the chart that I use for the United States, and a lot of astrologers do, the Saturn is there, and the 10th house represents our government. And there's a technique, if you ever, look at projections and deal with them on your own psychological level. For her, she projects into the United States the need to really address some of the dysfunction in our government very strongly.
Absolutely.
And her chart confirms that. And,
Yep.
And to what extent she's personally looked at that psychologically, I'm not sure. But at least in terms of her political stances, there's evidently a commitment on her part to turn some things around.
Well, Uranus is the ruler of her north node, and Uranus is conjunct Hygeia, and Hygeia is about proactive health, and it's all kinds of health, anything that needs to be healed. So she's potentiated going forward to actually find these political things that really are not well, and to make them well, to find political wellness, to find cultural and ethnic and emotional wellness within our country again, which is gone. It's and I'll kind of leave it at that. I mean, I don't want to get into prognostications, but we're in the thick of it, and we need the AOCs and the Ilhans and the Rashidas to pull us out of this, because the guys that we've been counting on aren't doing it.
Well, and it just seems like many of our legislators are stuck in an old mode of operating that has brought us to these times that have become completely out of balance.
Right.
Economically, justice-wise. I mean, we've known, anyone who's been following, justice in terms of racial justice and social justice knows that that's been a long, hard struggle all along in the United States, and still is to this day. But I think, we reached a certain kind of economic balance 20, 30 years ago, 40 maybe, that is, was unusual in our history, and yet we've slipped right back into the imbalance.
Well, it also could have just been, the surplus after the war, that finally, gave out. The problem, from my perspective, is that, the elections are federal, but the political parties are private. And the Democratic Party, just like both parties have really hijacked the election time and time again. They're private enterprise. They are not publicly regulated, or they're not public entities. It happened in 1948 with Truman. Henry Wallace should have been president of the United States. He was responsible for all the things that happened in the New Deal. But in the final vote at the Democratic convention, he lost. They decided to choose Truman, and they want to give us Biden. I mean, they're doing the same thing again. They want that middle of the road. They cannot budge off center, and something's got to give somewhere, Merrylin.
Wow. Okay, well, any last words about Alexandria and her chart?
Just watch her. Maybe as we get closer to it, I've been looking at the November 2020 election, and I think that her chart's entirely lit up by it. But we'll leave that. Just kind of pique your interest a little bit. We'll kind of leave that for another day.
Well, it kind of something. I think it was this week. Weeks start to blur together for me sometimes. There was a comment made about someone running again. It's that time, unfortunately, for the House of Representatives every 2 years. So they're campaigning for re-election, even though we're a year off, plus some months, to the next federal election. And there's somebody running against her, and one of the local, rather national news stations. I was surfing and kind of brought it up, and I thought, how strong a support does she have in her own district?
They're going to come after her hard.
They are indeed. And I have no idea what will happen there. But given the connection she has to this country, whether she's reelected or not, I don't think we will have seen the end of her.
We have not seen the end of her. I think that we're going to see her in a more authoritative and official positions as she matures politically.
Could be. Well, Daniel, you have your practice here in Santa Fe, and I know that you do readings and whatnot. And if people want to get in touch with you, what can they do?
Yeah, easiest thing to do is to call me at 505-930-2748. We can talk, and you can tell me what it is that you need. I also have a great website at www.evolutionaryastrology.com. Come see me. I'm taking appointments for readings at the moment. I'm about 2 or 3 weeks out, but call me and we'll get you booked.
All right. You write articles too on that website.
I do a lot of writing, and I do a lot of speaking online as well.
Follow some of the things that you're saying and doing. Well, here we are at KSFR. I want to remind you that we will be podcasting this show as we do other shows at ksfr.org. So feel free to re-listen or share it with friends. You can do that if you wish. And don't forget to support KSFR. And coming up after this show today, of course, is Climate One from San Francisco. Various takes on the climate and from different kinds of approaches. I'm always kind of interested in what kind of take they will have for today's show. We'll be back next week with Moonwise here on KSFR Saturday mornings. And you can hear the Moon Minute every weekday morning at 5:30. And if that's too early in the morning for you, keep in mind that those are also podcasts at ksfr.org. This is KSFR, White Rock, Santa Fe Public Radio for northern New Mexico and the